My name is Elizabeth Killinger, and I'm president of Reliant and executive vice president at NRG. I'm also a sixth-generation Texan and honored to call Houston home. For those of you who aren't familiar with what we do at NRG, we're a Fortune 500 integrated power company providing retail electricity, natural gas, security, and home services to nearly 4 million customers in North America and more than 2 million here in Texas alone. We also provide portable power, portable solar, and portable lighting solutions to millions of customers around the world. Our flagship brands, in addition to NRG, are Reliant and Goal Zero, but we sell through others as well. I'm also a board member of the Greater Houston Partnership and serve as the chair of the organization's Energy 2.0 Industry Committee. Our Energy 2.0 team is made up of people, some of whom you'll get to meet today. They're committed to ensuring Houston stays the energy capital of the world and becomes the energy transition capital of the world. I'm honored today to be representing both NRG and the Greater Houston Partnership for today's virtual event. Let's run through a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, all attendees are muted and your videos are turned off, so you don't have to worry about a snafu there. There will be time at the end for Q&A, and we ask that you use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, not the chat function like some others use, but the Q&A tab. That's what we'll be monitoring for questions from the audience. Today, we have nearly 300 people registered from across North America. So I wanted to give a brief update on who the Greater Houston Partnership is for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's the principal business organization for the Greater Houston area. The partnership prioritizes three things. First, promoting economic development, investment, and trade. Second, advocating for sound public policy at all levels. And then convening a diverse set of regional leaders on key issues that impact the Greater Houston community. As the nation's fourth largest city, Houston is a vibrant metro powered by one of the youngest, fastest growing, and most diverse populations anywhere in the world. We offer companies and executives a pro-business environment with no corporate or personal income tax, and a cost of living that's below the national average. Over the years, our economy has diversified from one that was strong in energy to now one with leading positions across key global industries like energy, but also life sciences, manufacturing, and aerospace. As the Energy 2.0 capital of the world, Houston is headquartered and has the intellectual capital for virtually every segment of the energy industry. The world around us is changing, and as the industry evolves, Houston has both the opportunity and the responsibility to tackle this challenge and lead the global energy transition to a cleaner, more efficient, and more sustainable low-carbon world. Houston's emergence as a leading clean energy city has positively impacted its regional economy and strengthened the resilience of its energy infrastructure. Despite the pandemic and the oil market downturn, Houston continues to create new clean energy jobs with now over 100 solar companies and 30 wind energy companies calling Houston home. The unique combination of Houston's talented energy workforce, the energy research expertise, the ecosystem to support energy tech startups, and innovation and energy intensive industries makes it a perfect market for clean tech companies to bring their technologies to scale. Houston has the expertise, that built-in know-how to apply these technologies at utility and industrial scale. Because of this, Houston is already leading the way to the digitization of traditional oil and gas, but has also become a hub of activity for renewables and for the development of carbon capture management technology. Houston is home to major corporate R&D centers like BP's Center for High Performance Computing and Baker Hughes Center for Technology Innovation. In addition, corporate venture arms like Chevron Technology Ventures and Shell Technology Ventures as well as a range of VC-backed energy startups. In fact, a large number of the startups that competed in last week's Rice Business Plan competition focused on energy technology and fighting climate change. That competition is the world's richest and largest graduate level student startup competition. In a minute, we'll hear from Emily Reichert, the CEO of Greentown Labs North America, which is North America's largest clean tech incubator. They announced last week, and many of you probably saw that they were going to extend their offices and open a second location in Houston to broaden their impact and help accelerate the energy transition through clean tech entrepreneurship. This comes at a time of great momentum for Houston's innovation ecosystem and further positions the region as a leader in energy efficiency, transportation, and generation. Houston is truly a hub of the global energy industry, and there's no better place for the next generation of energy leaders to create scale and innovations that will change the world. I'd like to play a short video here now to bring that to life.
Houston, Texas, a city built on innovation, opportunity, leadership, a city known globally as the energy capital of the world. We create the energy that makes modern living possible, but the world is changing, and humankind faces a dual challenge. Economic opportunity and quality of life are improving around the globe. To support that growth, we will need more energy, now and for decades to come. At the same time, we must reduce carbon emissions and respond to the effects of climate change. Houston is committed to tackling this dual challenge head-on. It is both a responsibility and a great opportunity. We're ready to create energy that's cleaner, more affordable, and even more reliable. Oil and gas companies are driving efficiency improvements. Leading wind, solar, and biofuels companies already operate from Houston. But we need to scale up technologies that run smarter and more efficiently with a reduced carbon footprint. And we must drive innovations like carbon capture and storage technology. No other city in the world is better positioned than Houston to take this dual challenge and turn it into opportunity. The city of innovators and problem solvers focused on the future. Houston, Texas, leading the global energy transition.
So as evidenced in the video, the Houston business community, stakeholders, elected officials, and others are dedicated to strengthening Houston's position as the energy transition capital of the world. And as we welcome Greentown Labs to Houston, know that we are focused on recruiting more of what we call Energy 2.0 companies to set up shop here in the energy capital of the world. One of the best kept secrets is that Houston is a welcoming place for renewables and other non-oil and gas energy companies. We understand energy and have some of the most talented people in the world right here focused in energy in our community. Some are currently working in organizations today to produce energy more efficiently and affordably. Others are one phone call away from being a part of startup organizations that will pave the way for the next generation of energy. Greentown Labs is going to accelerate the connections between some of the most innovative clean tech startups in the world with some of the largest energy companies in the world. And together, that's how we change the world. Enough talking about Greentown Labs. Now we'd like to show a short introductory video, and I'll turn it over to their CEO, Emily Reichert.
My name is Emily Reichert, and I'm the CEO of Greentown Labs.
At Greentown Labs, our mission is really to provide startups the community, resources, space, and connections that they need in order to thrive. We have nearly 100 startups, and every one of them is tackling a big challenge to do with climate or environment in 100,000 square feet of space. Greentown Labs has a network of 100 investors, 50 corporate partners, and over 250 manufacturers that we work with to help our startups go from the stage of having a prototype in the lab to being able to test something in a real-world environment with a first customer. Greentown Labs really brings us all together around a really important theme. What can we do through entrepreneurship to address our biggest global challenge, which is climate change? Well, good afternoon, everyone, from the magic of virtual world. I'm here in Boston, Massachusetts, and for those who don't know me, my name is Emily Reichert, and I'm the CEO of Greentown Labs. And I want to give a big thank you and shout out to the Greater Houston Partnership for hosting us today, and to Elizabeth Killinger of NRG and Reliant, a founding partner of Greentown Labs Houston, for that wonderful introduction to today's webinar. Last week, I was actually in Houston, Texas, along with Elizabeth and Barbara Berger, who you'll hear from later during the panel, and our other founding partners who are with us virtually, including Ajay Mehta from Shell, to join Sylvester Turner in announcing Greentown Labs' expansion to the energy transition capital of the world. And I'm just so glad to be with you all again this week as we continue to celebrate the expansion and begin our transition to locating and building an incubator here in the city of Houston. And as you just heard on the video, Greentown Labs, and I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble seeing this screen. But we'll go with it. Let me just start with who is Greentown Labs. So we are the largest clean tech and climate organization for supporting startups in the world. As was mentioned in the video, we have 100,000 square feet of prototyping, laboratory space, and really an environment that supports entrepreneurs through their growth from the period of when they are just getting started to their Series A round of investment. As well, we have a network of curated startup organizations and others that really help us to support and nourish and grow these entrepreneurs and their companies over a period which is typically about 2 years. And we're very excited to be doing that in a new location of Houston, Texas, where we can grow our impact and really support a new generation of startups who are driving the energy transition in Houston, Texas. Now, Greentown Labs has grown from a community of more than 100 early stage companies who were working to tackle the world's climate and environmental challenges. And since our founding, we have supported more than 280 startups that have collectively created more than 6,500 jobs and have raised more than $850 million in capital. And these companies have then generated at least $1.5 billion in regional economic impact. We are so excited to scale our impact further through our first ever national expansion to the city of Houston. And so pleased to have Mayor Sylvester Turner, who was at our announcement on June 16th. The mayor has been an incredible supporter and champion of Greentown's expansion to Houston from the very beginning of this journey, now more than a year in the making. Under Mayor Turner's leadership, Houston has released a climate action plan that is quite ambitious, and the city has really already begun the energy transition. The City of Houston municipality is already powered by 92% renewable energy and will soon reach 100% with the help of our founding partner, NRG, and will be the first major US city to achieve this goal. We applaud the city's leadership in taking action on climate, and we hope to be a catalyst for continuing to drive progress on its energy transition and to help the city reach its ambition of carbon neutrality by 2050 through the development of innovative new clean technologies, some of which we hope will come from Greentown Labs. Most of all, though, we're excited to build a bridge between startups in the Boston area and in Houston, because we really need the best and brightest engineering and business minds working together to develop the solutions that we need to address climate change. So why Houston? Well, a lot of folks have asked us this question: why Houston for your first national expansion? First and foremost, Houston is the energy capital of the world, and it needs to be the energy transition capital of the world. We know that we can't solve climate change from the US coast alone, and we believe it's critical to engage with all parts of the country, all ecosystems in the United States, especially in the middle of this country. We did recognize as well that there was a potential gap in the ecosystem, and we learned about this, and really there was not another clean tech or climate-focused incubator to be able to fill that gap. There was a need for a convener and someone to bring entrepreneurs together to really help them find one another within this vast landscape that is Houston, Texas. And so we really aim for Greentown Houston to be a place for convening climate startups, investors, corporate partners, students, and other stakeholders who are working in clean tech in Houston. As I've already mentioned, we've had amazing support from the mayor and his team, the Greater Houston Partnership, and many founding partners. We're eager to work with world-leading energy organizations who call Houston home, and the incredible strength, talent, and assets that can be redeployed towards a decarbonized future in the energy transition. And we're excited to be part of a growing innovation ecosystem here in Houston with Mass Challenge, who's also Boston-based, but now in Houston, the Rice Alliance, which will be represented by Brad Burke in just a moment on our panel, the ION, and many other wonderful organizations who are leading the charge. Now, Greentown Labs will be the City of Houston's first climate and clean tech focused startup incubator. And what we hope to do is provide more than 30,000 square feet of prototyping, lab, office, and community space to about 50 young companies. We're hoping to open our doors to Houston's entrepreneur community, as well as all of those who will be supporting them in the spring of 2021. But we are already welcoming startups into our Houston community. And you can go to our website. We have a special landing page at greentownlabs.com where you can find information about how to connect in right now. Finally, I just want to say a big shout out and thank you to the founding partners that made all of this possible. You can see the names on the screen before you. And you should also know that several of them are on the panel today. As I've already mentioned, they have been with us through this journey over the last 15 months, and we could not be announcing our expansion to Houston or building an incubator without their support. So thank you to the City of Houston, the Greater Houston Partnership, and all of our founding partners for making Greentown Houston a reality. Thank you all so much for being here today, and now I turn it back to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Emily, for that presentation and for picking Houston to begin the journey of expansion for Greentown. We couldn't be more thrilled to welcome Greentown Labs to Houston and appreciate your participation in our panel today, where we have the opportunity to hear from key academia, as well as some of my fellow Energy 2.0 committee members in Houston, and talk a little bit more about how we're leading in the global energy transition. Joining today's panel, we have Barbara Berger, President of Chevron Ventures. We have Ajay Mehta, General Manager of New Energies at Shell. We have Brad Burke, Managing Director of Rice Alliance, easy for me to say, Rice Alliance for Technology and Entrepreneurship. And of course, Emily, CEO of Greentown Labs. To kick things off, I'd like to ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself and the role you and your organizations are playing to enable Houston's future as the Energy 2.0 capital of the world. And I wanted to ask Barbara if she would kick it off.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here on a somewhat rainy day here in Houston. So as Elizabeth said, I am president of Chevron Technology Ventures. We've been around for about 21 years. And our mission is to really be the scouts and access external innovation and then integrate it into Chevron's game today and tomorrow. We're not based in Houston as a corporation, but we have close to 8,000 employees here that do call Houston home. And for all the reasons you said in the video and everything, is that it is really important that Houston play a critical role in the energy transition. And it's really important that the incumbent large companies play a leadership role in that. And so I think the intersection of companies like Chevron, like Shell, the intersection of all of the innovation ecosystem here in Houston, it's a perfect recipe for the challenge that we face of affordable, reliable, and ever cleaner energy.
Great. Brad, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I'd be glad to go next. So as you heard, my name is Brad Burke. I'm the Managing Director of the Rice Alliance for Technology and Entrepreneurship, which is a program of Rice University. And we were founded about 20 years ago with the vision to help Rice in Houston play the role that Stanford has played in Silicon Valley. So that means that we have helped over the 20 years to support, mentor, provide advice, provide access to funding for startups in Houston so that we can help foster this community of startups, that we can help create jobs, that we can help create economic value and economic wealth in Houston. And we do that in a number of arenas. Most people have heard of us because we do run the largest and richest student startup competition for tech student startups. And we just had that last week. Awarded just over $1 million in prizes. But we also run an accelerator program. We also, from a research faculty standpoint, try to help commercialize research coming out of Rice and other institutions here. We run a series of venture forum events. A series in energy is the largest focus of ours. We do 4 energy and clean tech related events each year. We've had over 2,700 companies, 200 startups benefit from participating in our programs. And those companies, those startups have raised over $21 billion in funding during this period of time. So we've been able to or are focused on the scaling of our programs so that as many startups can benefit as possible, connect with investors or mentors to provide that funding they need in order to get their initial funding and their growth funding. And we're celebrating now our 20th anniversary of doing that.
Great, congratulations on that. And finally, Ajay, will you introduce yourself?
Sure, Elizabeth. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for this opportunity to connect with all of you. I'm Ajay Mehta. I'm the General Manager of Shell's New Energies Research and Technology Group. And my group is really interested across the full spectrum of renewable energy technologies. Everything ranging from kind of the near-term work in integrated solar PV to offshore wind, to looking at electric mobility solutions, midterm technology areas such as hydrogen, nature-based solutions, longer-term trends that we see in things like power to liquids or utility scale energy storage, monetization of natural gas. A lot of these are things which our existing ecosystem that we have in Houston can easily lend itself to support. And we've been a very, very active player in the Houston ecosystem for a very, very long time, and are invested to stay that way in the years to come. Innovation is really at the heart of pretty much everything that we do in Shell. Not only do we have kind of a major research center in Houston, but we also are very active in a number of the existing universities and academic institutions that are in our city, including the Carbon Hub that's at Rice University, Center for Carbon Management at U of H, or the City of Houston's Houston Exponential Initiative, Evolve. All these are different pieces of kind of the value chain that's going to be required to push the whole agenda forward for Houston to truly emerge as the energy transition capital of the world. And now we have Greentown Labs, which is kind of a fantastic addition to really kind of rejuvenate that whole ecosystem and start creating an arena for us to start connecting all these dots across this energy transition. Inside Shell, we remain very, very resolute in supporting the ambition of limiting the rise of global temperatures to less than 1.5 degrees C. We believe in climate change, and we want to play our role in society to be able to move even faster. And with respect to that, we have recently announced our ambition to become a net zero energy business by 2050. We're only going to get there by working together. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion on how do we connect the industry, academia, startups, other forward-looking companies so that we can get to where we need to go together. Thanks very much. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Ajay. Without further ado, let's dive into a few questions that we've prepared in advance, and then we will take questions from the audience. So the first one, and I'll start by seeing if maybe Emily or Barbara would attack this one. But the question is, many cities, particularly on the East and West Coast, are well known for successfully building clean tech industries. Why is Houston well positioned to lead the global energy transition?
You want me to take that, Emily?
Sure.
So the question was why Houston? I would say why not Houston? And I mean, there's a variety of different reasons. You talked about it in your video, but I'd highlight two things. One is integration and one is scale. And if you think about energy, think about it as a system. And we, in this energy transition, we are not going to throw away the current system and build a brand new system. So integration is important. And we're going to evolve some pieces. We're going to add pieces and integration to what's there and the infrastructure that is critical. And every part of that is present in Houston. And so, an example of, and Ajay talked about renewables and hydrogen. If you do work in those areas, but you don't think about the impact to the grid, you don't think about the infrastructure that's required in hydrogen, you won't get the scale and impact that you need. So I think integration is important. The second is scale. Energy is big. I like to tell people, if you think about the energy industry as those who produce and those who use, it's all of us, right? And so it is huge. And scale matters, and scale matters for the climate challenges. The amount of innovation, the amount of change that's going to be required to meet the objectives of, and the dual challenge that that you talked about in your video is tremendous. And Houston, first of all, Houston thinks big. The industries here have always had a very large scale component to them. They are not small industries, and they solve big problems. And they solve big problems collaboratively, because no one company or no one part of the energy industry is going to solve this. So I think it's all of those pieces. And on top of that, you know, a commitment from a number of the key stakeholders in the city and championed by our mayor, to really think about the talent and the innovation that is needed going forward, and an inclusive innovation. And I think we'll talk about that, which I'm pretty excited about, is doing it in an inclusive way, which I'm not sure anyone else has pulled off. So that's why Houston, and I think when I presented that sales pitch to Emily, maybe it helped.
Well, Barbara, you've done a great job over several months now. I'd just say that there's already a lot going on in clean tech in Houston. It's just not well known. So as was mentioned previously, there's 130 solar and wind companies already in Houston. And that's not counting any building up of a clean tech startup infrastructure. So I think that there's a lot going on. I'd underline Barbara's point about scale. This is a gigaton size challenge, and we need an industry that knows how to handle problems of that size to be engaged in that challenge that we all face, which is climate change. And finally, I'd say that this is where the talent is that understands energy, that understands these big complex systems. And I think if we don't engage Houston in addressing climate change and what we need to do with our energy system going forward, we're really missing the boat. I mean, we can't do it without the city and the industry that exists in Houston. It's just not going to work.
Great, thank you. Ajay or Brad, do you have anything you want to add, or do you want to move to the next one?
Yeah, maybe just a quick one that I could add, Elizabeth, is that I always think of why not Houston? Why aren't we, much more visible on the radar screen? Because yes, both the East Coast and the West Coast have a lot more a lot more experience, perhaps, especially in the venturing space, perhaps, and in generally the startup culture that they have there. But I think the point that was made by Barbara around scale, I don't think anybody can match, what we can do at scale, and that's the problem is enormous. And in the absence of being able to do things at scale, we're only going to make incremental progress. And I think that's where Houston in particular, and the skills that we can bring in Texas in general, can really come to the fore to solve the problem here. We have the industry, we have the know-how. Sometimes people say that, oh, this is an area in which we're going to have to import a whole set of new types of skills and disciplines. It's the same skills and disciplines. We're just trying to apply them to a different problem set. So again, I believe we have all of the ingredients to really make this happen.
Elizabeth, I'd add two things if I could. One is that what I've seen what appears to be a major shift over the last 5 to 10 years, and I don't think it's understood outside of Houston, but the major energy companies, led by really Chevron and Shell, but now all the other major companies and the major service providers are all very interested in this new energy and energy transition. And I see that because they're all engaged in the programs that we run that bring together startups with energy corporations. So the perception that may exist outside of Houston, I think, is not correct, in the sense that the major energy companies, especially, again, Chevron and Shell and others, are very much engaged in this innovation in the energy economy. And so they're here already, and they already convene in all of the major energy, and I deal with the early stage world. So early stage startups those companies are already engaged, and the investors already come to Houston in the energy area. So it makes complete sense to me that Houston is the leading, has a huge potential to continue to be not just the oil and gas capital of the world going forward, but the true energy capital going forward.
Thank you, Brad. And while you have the mic, I might just ask, is there anything else you would like to add that you didn't cover in your introduction, just about how RICE and the RICE Alliance, the role that's played in the energy transition and entrepreneurship and the pipeline of talent, really, and really that blend, that partnership between public and private, as well as academia?
Yeah, well, given the opportunity to talk some more, I'm glad to. I'm very enthusiastic about what's happening because for us to solve the global problems, we need very innovative technologies. And most often I see them come through innovative technology startups. And we see some of those come out of Rice and some of those come out of universities around the world who in Houston last week at the business plan competition, our energy venture events as well. You know, I'm excited about the opportunity for the startup entrepreneurs to be a part of our community and who are part of our community to connect with corporations and investors and mentors and advisors who can help them take it forward. And having Greentown be a part of this community is going to make another inflection point in what we do here. So I couldn't be more excited about Greentown coming to Houston. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention two other things. One is the Rice University, on the call know, is developing the ION, which is a 300,000 square foot facility in Midtown Houston at the old, what was a Sears huge department store. And that'll be open at the beginning of 2021. I think the development of the ION will be another defining moment in the history of Houston as one of the leading entrepreneurship cities, because it will serve as a hub not only for energy startups, but for all startups and investors. So when investors fly over from the Bay Area or fly over from Boston and New York, they now have a place to come, both the ION and Greentown Labs, where they can get a pretty quick view of the startup community here. And so rather than simply flying across the country and not stopping, they will now have two wonderful places where they can get a glimpse of almost everything going on in the Houston startup community. So I'm very excited both about Greentown and about the ION that'll be opening next year.
Great. Anybody else want to talk about that? Or are we ready to go to the next one?
Let's go to the next one.
Okay, let's do it. So Houston has leading energy companies that are investing significant financial resources into energy transition research and startups. The question is, how important is it for Houston's major energy companies to lead the region's efforts to become the Energy 2.0 capital of the world? And before I toss it to the group, I wanted to just speak to a little bit about what NRG is doing at the consumer level. We actually have a smart home here in the Houston Heights neighborhood. The home is a relatively new home, but it serves as a technology hub, and it gives us a chance to test products and services in a true to life setting. And then because we have such a large customer base, it enables us to bring those capabilities to customers, but not trip on the way out, if you will. So that smart home is staffed with a dedicated team and features innovations that our customers enjoy today, as well as some breakthroughs that people aren't enjoying yet. But the objective there is to shape the future of smart, secure, clean, and energy efficient living. And one thing that is interesting is we have a full set of power generation capabilities in that home, 5 different sources. So that's just one example. The other point I would make is we are, like the others have mentioned, NRG is committed to sustainability, and it's one of the 5 key priorities of our business strategy. And we too are on a path of reducing our CO2 emissions by 50% by 2025 and achieving net zero by 2050. But I might open the floor up for anybody else who wants to speak to the region's efforts of the larger companies. So maybe Ajay and Barbara.
Well, let me take a stab at that. You know, and I'll try to summarize. You know, why should the big companies play a leadership role? And I think there's a question in your Q&A about, you know, the different coasts, and you know, we think about it in 3 ways, and I think it helps to reinforce that comment I made earlier around integration. you know, the first place is we take practical steps to lower the emissions of what we currently operate. And I think that's table stakes. And we, whether it's CO2 emissions or methane emissions, you know, that is the waste that we produce, and we need to take steps, set targets, and devote resources and hold ourselves accountable, and then share our best practices across the industry, particularly with operators that are smaller than us and across the value chain. So that, you know, that's step number one. I think there's a really interesting opportunity on integration. And I think Houston can play a role in, and I've participated in all kinds of things where the renewables and the oil and gas got together and realized that we need to create the system of the future that's lower carbon. And, you know, I think we can play a lead role in that. We do know the energy system, and we can bring on additional energy sources and integrate them in. And then lastly, and, you know, Brad, you get a gold star in my book. Brad, and actually Emily as well. You know, getting the big companies and the little companies to learn how to work together is one of the secrets to the success of all of this. And it's not natural, but we have a lot of success points. And you know, we've been there for 21 years. I mean, Shell and Chevron have been there for a long time on the venture side, and really learning not just about writing checks for small companies, but how do we help them grow, and how do we help them integrate into our operations? And so that we have to change our own operations as a part of that. So, I mean, you know, those are three pillars within ours, and it's really focused on collaboration and integration.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, to just pick up on your last point there, absolutely. I think we've got to figure out how to more effectively work with startup companies. We've had a long history inside Shell and other majors, of course, of working with academic partners. You know, we have an extensive network of partners across the United States and globally. But you've got to kind of recognize also that the world is changing, and a lot of young students coming out of universities are opting to go and start their own companies. And what we are finding is that some of the breakthrough innovations that can happen in a small startup company can really bring value if they are nurtured properly under the umbrella of a larger company that then has both the financial wherewithal as well as the capability to do the scale up. And that's kind of a word that you will hear a lot from many of us, because for large companies, for things to really be worthwhile in the end, you've got to be able to scale that. And that scaling is not something that happens automatically. And getting the technology up to a certain stage is fantastic, but then all of you are very well familiar about the classic valley of death, where the number of technologies that go exactly nowhere, because we couldn't figure out that next step of how do we scale things up. And I think that's where we've got to approach this with tremendous amount of humility, that there is learnings to be had both ways. We have to figure out better and different ways of working. How do we really kind of harness that talent that's coming in from a lot of these younger startup companies? They are far more nimble. They are far more able to pivot. You know, they don't get married to a particular pathway. But how do we kind of help and create that you know, culture within the IGs of a larger organization? So I think that's going to be a critical step as we go forward. And the second thing is, again, going to be around the ability to do larger scale pilots and demos. You know, to de-risk the technologies for companies to be making multi-billion-dollar decisions down the road, which is really what's going to be required at the end of the day, you know, to make a stab at the energy transition. That's the kind of stuff that we can be very good at in our own backyard here. So I see a couple of areas where, you know, we can play a very central role going forward.
And if I could just maybe underline a couple of the points that have already been made. I think the question of scale for startups, dirty secret about clean tech startups, they're mostly making physical products that will ultimately need to be manufactured. And so you're not scaling by uploading an app somewhere and suddenly you have customers. It's a long process and it involves different kinds of distribution channels. But before that, you need to do pilots, you need to do demonstrations, and just to get to the scale that you need to really have an impact, you need these bigger partners who have lots of experience and connections to real markets. And so I think that's incredibly important. I also just love to hear on this panel the openness to learning from small companies, because I think large companies and small companies can learn a lot from each other. The large companies bring a lot to the table, markets and expertise and the ability to do big things. The small companies bring a nimbleness and an excitement and enthusiasm and many new ideas that are just waiting to get to market because they don't necessarily know what's not possible. And that's a really good place to be starting from whenever you're building something new.
I think that's a great point, Emily. The thought that comes to mind is like what happens in your house when you bring a puppy in and you have other animals that have been in your house. It's like everything is a little brighter and a little more exciting, and the joy and the passion, and just like you said, things that you didn't think were possible now are possible again. So I think that's a great point. We have like 3 or 4 more questions that we had prepared to answer, but we have a boatload of questions coming in. So we'll do one more prepared, and then we'll see if we can get a couple of the questions that have come in. So I'm going to kind of combine a couple of the questions we had hoped to talk about around the tech and energy sectors facing diverse and inclusive, facing challenges with attracting diverse and inclusive workforce, as well as the technology and innovation that are really important to the success of the energy transition. So I might ask for you to just each of you to make a couple of remarks on, you can pick 1 or 2 or both, but here's some thoughts there, and then we'll get to the audience Q&A. So why don't we start, Ajay, you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, so Elizabeth, I'm trying to make sure I understood the question properly. Is it in terms of attracting a diverse talent pool to
you
address
can that one, as well as this dimension of technology and innovation of being so important to the energy transition? If you think about it, both of those 2 things really need to come together and can come together. So you might speak, you can speak on one or both, or anything else you want to end with before we get to audience Q&A.
Sure, I'll just keep it short. I think that most of us, have a pretty open innovation mindset already in our companies, and so the things that attract us is ideas, and the ideas don't have any do not discriminate between kind of where you're coming from and what the color of your skin is. It's all about the ideas and how do you incubate those ideas, coming into the organization. And so if you take a look pretty much at a snapshot of any of our companies that are working actively in this space, it's around getting people excited and motivated about what's possible. And I think that, to me, is at the center of the energy transition, that perhaps this is the most exciting time, honestly, to be in this energy business, because the kind of disruption that's going to happen in the energy systems is unparalleled. And it's going to happen in a much shorter period of time than people imagine. So I think just getting as many kind of creative forces and different points of views to the table, but with an agenda of how do we move the needle forward, I think is going to make the difference.
Maybe I'll add from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, and I think it's a really important one, and there's a lot more work to be done. We have work to be done within our company relative to our own employees, and then you think about the ecosystem. And I will make a plug. Houston Exponential was created a few years ago to really be the convening body to ensure that we made progress as a city, relative to the innovation ecosystem. There were a number of principles on it, but I'll just name 2. One was all about talent, and one was all about inclusivity. And I'm learning a lot on this every day. And you don't know the road someone else has traveled, right? And the best way to learn something about that is ask them. But Houston Exponential has focused in this area, and a couple of things they've done, which I, again, learned from these events are female founders, entrepreneurs of color, and understanding what challenges they've had that are the same challenges as everybody else, and what challenges they uniquely face because of access or barriers. And so, I think, it's an important area for us to attract talent and also be attractive to all kinds of talent. I don't think anyone has nailed this. I think as the most diverse city in the country, and with a zeal to make our progress be experienced by all, we have an opportunity to, really have some leadership in this as well as the energy transition. And I know I want to be a part of that.
Thank you, Barbara. Brad, do you want to make some comments, and we'll let Emily finish that one off?
Yeah, sure. Two thoughts on that. One is that, so I was extremely pleased that last week, a person of color and a team of color won the Rice Business Plan competition and finished first place. So it showed to me the progress, some of the progress that we've made, although we have much more to do. But the fact that diverse teams can come through the competition and win and do very well, I think is a statement of the diversity of the Houston ecosystem and how accepting the Houston ecosystem is. And the other is that you talked about, and you kind of married the issue of innovation and diversity. And, I think that university research groups are already fairly diverse, but they are critical. I came from industry, from the energy industry, but now I've been in the academic world for a while. I see more than ever the value of the research programs that go on throughout the US and around the world, because it is through these research initiatives where some of these breakthrough innovations take place that will be necessary if we're going to achieve the environmental goals, the climate goals that we want. Or programs like, and it was alluded to, Shell launched a carbon hub at Rice last year to help find ways to reduce the net use of carbon in the country. But in general, I see very much in my world startups that are founded out of a university that are taking a university-based technology and then taking it forward to launch that, I think is pretty exciting. And I think that we will see more impact of new technology innovations than we can.
Well, I just want to follow on Brad's point and say, no question, there's so much innovation needed to address the energy transition and climate change more broadly. I mean, we know some of the solutions, right? We have solar, we can make that more efficient. We have wind, we can put that offshore. But then there's energy storage. How are we going to deal with the intermittency problem? And we've got a grid that needs to be updated from something that was created 120 years ago or however long. So there's many, many, many different problems to solve. But I think for all that, that means that we need all talent to be engaged in that challenge of solving these problems. And so if we're leaving out 50% because we're leaving out all women, or we're leaving out all people of color, or we're leaving out any group, we're not really leveraging the talent that could be deployed to addressing this problem. And so the energy industry and the clean tech industry in general is not good at diversity, equity, inclusion. Let's just say that flat out. But what I have been encouraged by is, maybe because of what's happening in our national consciousness over the last couple of weeks with the death of George Floyd, there are many conversations and a lot of learning going on that I think will move us towards an industry that is more diverse and inclusive. And I know in my company and among my peers, this is something we are actively trying to figure out. And so we welcome input, things that work, as Barbara said, listening to the entrepreneurs and understanding their challenges and how we support them in so many different ways. this is one more way that we can support entrepreneurs and those out there with the big ideas that are needed to address climate change.
Thank you all. Okay, so we have like 5 minutes left. Most people these days have new calls on the hour or 30 minutes, so we're committed to keeping you on time. So what that's going to mean is we're going to just grab one of like a handful of really great questions, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists that want to chime in on it, be brief. A sentence or two, max 3, so that we can cover the landscape on it and hear perspectives if you have it. But I will tell you that if you've asked a question, some of our folks from the Greater Houston Partnership, somebody will reach back out to you and have a conversation with you. And I'm sure I would boldly offer if somebody had a question for one of us, we would get back to you with the help of the Greater Houston Partnership. So with that, pressure is on me to pick a question. I'm going to go with the one that is, can the panelists speak to some of the funding opportunities in the Houston market for startup companies considering a location in Houston? And maybe while you're at it, if you can put a little sprinkle or two of the difference in the cultural sentiment on a perception of what Houston is versus the reality of what Houston is, in particular around the sentiment in the industry of the anti-fossil element. So, but speak to funding, because I think there are plenty of people who have an interest there. And then if you have a perspective or a point on the cultural divide between the coasts and the view or the perception of Houston. So who wants to grab that one? Take the mic.
Well, I'll add 2 sources of funding, and one is investment, whether it's from the corporate venture, which again, most every company has followed the lead that Chevron and Shell did, whether it's energy financial venture or private equity in this space. So if you're investable, increasingly there are venture funds that spend time here looking at companies or are from here. The second is from a funding perspective, it's really about scale. So if you want to partner with an operator to understand whether your technology works and partner relative to scale, those are 2 pieces that are funding that I think makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there are opportunities relative to the incubators and programs and things like that if you're early stage.
Yeah, and very quickly, Elizabeth, also there are 2 mechanisms for startup companies for funding in Shell. One is the Shell Ventures Group, which has of course been very active for many number of years. Typically, the technology would have to be perhaps a little bit more, technically advanced to get funding from the Shell Ventures Group. But there's also a Shell Game Changer vehicle, which is for very early stage innovation, where we also provide funding to just kind of incubate new ideas. And we recognize that there's perhaps a little bit of a gap for early stage startup companies that don't fill either of those criteria. So the Shell Ventures Group, along with our group, is now in the process of creating another vehicle to be able to fund companies like that, where you need to kind of take things, to a point where it becomes investable. So there are multiple mechanisms to access.
Great. Emily, I'm going to give it to you for comments on that or a final word, and then I'm going to do the same. If anybody else wants to make a final word, go for it.
Yeah, I'll address the second half of the question, which I think is the perception of Houston from the coast. And I have to say, coming from Boston and having lived in California, and but originally being from Arizona, I was also under the misapprehension, understanding that everyone in Houston really thought that fossil fuels should stay forever and that there was no interest in addressing climate change. That's kind of the mentality that many of us on the coast have about the middle of the country. And what I found was exactly the opposite. There are so many people here that are working on this challenge, that want to be part of the future of energy. Even if you look at polls, I think if you look at the percentage of people in Houston who are, think that something needs to be done about climate change, it's higher than the rest of the country by a couple points. So I think that what people think, if you've never been here and you've never talked to anyone or spent any time in Houston, except going through the airport, you're going to get a very different impression than if you're actually here on the ground talking to people and hearing how excited people are to be part of the energy transition and the future of energy. And frankly, again, we need all hands on deck at this time to address climate change, and the partners that I found here are absolutely in it with us.
Thank you so much, Emily. I mentioned at the beginning of the event that the Greater Houston Partnership and the Houston business community are focused on recruiting Energy 2.0 companies to relocate or grow their operations in the Houston region. We didn't talk a lot about that today, but there are plenty of companies who are looking to expand, and Houston would be a great place to do that. I hope today's discussion has made it clear that those businesses, wherever you are, you're welcome here, and we have connections so that your business can thrive when it comes. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.